Thanks everyone for sort of looking over in that direction and exercising your neck. Let me see if I can try to remember what the next slide is. This is always the big challenge whenever I present anything, to try to remember what the logical sequence was. But a little bit of preamble. It was last month that we got about 90 minutes about Julia, which was really awesome and really cool. And like I downloaded Julia the next day. I was so excited about it. You're not going to get 90 minutes of me talking about my experience with Statistics Without Borders. You'll even see that like at the last minute I tacked on, if anybody wants to, I can talk about a conference where I spoke earlier this week. So there you have it. It was, I have actually spoken at a conference. So whatever you might hear tonight, any absence of intelligence or professionalism, this would be the exception rather than the rule. I'm actually I have spoken before. So this is going to be fairly brief. I gave a similar presentation at our company that wound up being about 20 minutes. This, I might talk and ramble until people get up and leave the room, and it'll be about 30 minutes. I might talk a little bit extemporaneously about the conference that I went to on Monday, which, by the way, was the R in Insurance conference. Two things that are of a great deal of interest to a lot of people. Or it's like social hour, and we can kind of hit beer o'clock, or we could carry on talking about Python IDEs, or something like that. Okay, so what I'm going to address in this short period of time is something that I did earlier this year. I have to start off by saying that I'm not a statistician. I'm an actuary, and that's not at all the same thing. And in fact, I'm an actuary. I've been through the curriculum, but I didn't study actuarial science when I went to school. I studied physics. I was a dreadful physicist, and the world does not really need a whole lot of mediocre physicists. So as I kind of keep slouching backwards from one thing into the next, I became an actuary, which means that you know a little bit about statistics, but probably most people in this room know way more than me. I say that as a kind of an apologia to all of the statisticians in the audience as I start to talk about my experience with Statistics Without Borders. Although maybe that's a good point of emphasis, that you don't have to be a statistician to be able to get involved with them. So there is this organization called Statistics Without Borders. They are, I'm going to say, affiliated with the American Statistical Association. So I don't even know. Do we have any members of the American Statistical Association? Okay. Okay. All right. So it's a very popular group. I hear they have really, really wild get-togethers, so that you should probably check them out. But there is an organization called Statistics Without Borders, and every time that I say this to people, you get a sort of a quizzical look, because everybody's familiar with Doctors Without Borders, and let's face the facts, they're a little more badass than the Statistics Without Borders, Statisticians Without Borders. Nobody's like parachuting into Somalia to help somebody with taking an average of something or performing a regression. But nevertheless, there is a need for professional advice. There's even an Actuaries Without Borders, if you can imagine. I think there's probably less call for that. But there are a number of places in the world that do need access to professional services. And we're going to get into specifically why in this case. If you want to do anything with Statistics Without Borders, there's a mailing list. And that's kind of about it. Lucy asked me about, is this their website? And I went and checked it out. And yeah, it was about like I remembered it, which is that it was a website that looks as though nobody maintains it. And it's really, really outdated. They could probably use a little bit of support there. But for right now, they're kind of a mailing list that will occasionally ask for help. So I got my name on the mailing list. And some of the calls for assistance were things that were like out of my league. I can't remember what. There's one studying extrajudicial killings in Colombia, and they were using some kind of statistical technique that I'd never heard of to do that, and I thought that might be a little bit over my head. And there are some other projects where the skill level is maybe a little bit lower, and they get swamped with volunteers. So I'd really been kind of chomping at the bit to do something. A lot of what they do is kind of desk work, stuff that you can do from your home, that you can do remotely. they do some field work, and that was what I got involved in. So sometime earlier this year, on the mailing list, there was a call for volunteers to assist in 3 separate courses of teaching in Rwanda. The first is going to be teaching of the basics of survey statistics. Okay, I can't do that. I don't know anything at all about survey statistics. And I think the second one was going to be sort of more of the same, or sort of foundational statistics. I think I could probably fake that, but I'm sure that there are people that are better at that than I am. But then week 3 is we want to teach people how to use R. And I thought, all right, I can actually do that. Now, there are people, again, in this crowd even who know loads more about R than me. Like Ian, forget it. He could do that in his sleep. But he didn't volunteer. I did. So I got to go. And they asked sort of for my credentials, and I said, like, what qualifications do you have? I said, I've actually done a couple of workshops for the Casualty Actuarial Society. Because within that crowd, I'm actually light years ahead of where they are with R. So teaching basic introductory R, yeah, I could do that. We'll talk. If you're just learning R, I can teach you, the little stuff, and then after that, you're kind of on your own. And I said, I also give them a link to my blog. Almost kind of out of desperation. I don't know if anybody's ever read my blog. It's pirategrunt.com. And some of the stuff might be a little bit clever. Some of the stuff is actually kind of wrong and stupid. As I look back at some of my entries from last year, I think that wasn't all that bright. But either they didn't read the blog, or they read it and thought it was good enough, or the notion that I'm bright enough to teach actuaries was enough, or nobody else volunteered. And they said, sure, come on. So they had established 3 teams of 3. As we went through the process of designing the curriculum, working with folks on the ground in Kigali, Rwanda, things changed a little bit. They morphed. For a while, they were going to do everything in Stata, which meant that I would have had no business being there, because I've never used Stata. But then eventually it changed a little bit and morphed, and what the final week was going to be, the week where I was attending, was sort of refresher of a week's worth of R training, and using survey methods, and we did linear regression, logistic regression. And regression I'm fine with. I'm statistician enough to know that. Survey methods I didn't know at all, but that wound up not being a big deal. So the other 2 people who were with me, one of them is Jean Opsomer, who's the head of the statistics department at Colorado State, let's say. That's the one in Boulder, I hope. And his wife, Mary Meyer, who's also a professor there. So this is really cool. I got to hang out with real, statistics people. So that's all of the preamble. In talking about this with this crowd, I'm taking a slightly different approach from the way that I talked about it with people at my company, none of whom are statisticians or actuaries or anything. But with this crowd, I thought if you're not going to get any math at all, or any sort of data visualizations, you'll feel kind of cheated. So I produced all of this in R, because you can do that, which is nice. So we're going to do some preliminaries. If my computer will, oh, here we go, great. So first things first, does anybody know where Rwanda is? Because if you don't, then
Africa.
It is in Africa, yes. But if you don't, one of the really awesome things about R is that it can tell you where it is. So open up the Maps library, and I get a map of the world. You just hit that command, and does it? Oh, and that actually shows up kind of okay. So here it is. Now where exactly is Rwanda?
Go to Congo, turn right.
Yeah, that's just about it. Well, here you go. What we can do is we can take the map that we have right here and turn it into a very, very primitive choropleth. Just say that we want to add the Rwanda region, and we'll color it red. And can we make that out? I'll actually walk up here. So this tiny red dot right there is Rwanda. In Central Africa, just south of the equator. That world map will also give you the latitude and longitude, but let's pop over here. get a few basic facts about Rwanda. This is a really cool source of information. Don't know what those letters stand for, but it is a data source from the World Bank. I don't know if anybody's ever used this, but the World Bank has some really, really awesome information, particularly around statistics in developing economies. That's just really, really awesome stuff, and I'm going to show a few graphs about that. So there is an R interface to the World Bank's data source. There's also one for Ruby. There's also one for Python, and probably whatever other geeky interface you want to work with. But what I can do is I can use this function WDI_data, and it'll give me back a list. The first of which is a data frame of all of the measures that are available, all of the things that they track. And the second of which is a data frame that will have all of the countries and just very, very basic stats about the country. I didn't know that there were 248 countries tracked by the World Bank. It's actually a little bit less than that because they've got some aggregation areas, the Eurozone and so forth, but pretty comprehensive. More members there than are in FIFA. So we go looking for Rwanda. It's not alphabetized. If you just open up the data frame and kind of scan through it, so use grep to very, very quickly find out where Rwanda is in that giant data frame. And we pull off that row. We see that, yes, it's a country called Rwanda, number 194 in the list. Capital is Kigali. Income, low income. No surprises there. And lending, they track sort of lending status for countries. IDA stands for the International Development Association. This is an offshoot of the World Bank that gives loans and has economic investments in some of the world's poorest countries. Okay, so what else do we know about Rwanda, according to the World Bank? This interface has this data frame called which you get with the WDI_data function. 7,145 things they are measuring, right? And each of those, this is not like elements or anything like that. Each one of those might be a time series that spans 20 years. So trolling through that stuff is a little bit of a challenge to try to find a specific measure. But you do have this function WDI search. Because what I first want to do is, okay, just give me population sizes. By the way, I didn't do any of this research before I went there, just so we're clear. I researched a few other things, but all of this is just stuff that I did in anticipation of this presentation. So we've got this measure, sp.pop.totl. I'm just pulling it for 2010. That appears to be a year where there's coverage for most stuff. You get a lot of NAs when you pull the information. So let's have a look. Yeah. Total population, China, pretty big. The EU, 504 million. India, 1.2 million. United States, 309. That's a lot. Rwanda, 10.8 million. So this is, I think, roughly, it would be like roughly the size of, I think Maryland is the state that it's closest to in terms of population size, or either that or land area. Not a very, very large place. But we don't like looking at numbers. We like to visualize things because that makes things a bit clearer. Right, so Rwanda, pretty small in terms of population. What else do we want to know? Population over 65. This is a number that I'm going to talk about again a little bit later. So the percentage of people who are over 65, if you look at the EU, a lot of old people still kicking around, better than 15% of the population over 65. The United States is doing not too bad, at, call it about 13%. China, India, you can see that the population, or the senior population is not quite as large. So we think, okay, maybe this is perhaps to do with changes, variations in life expectancy in the various countries, and that's really not so. Rwanda does have the shortest life expectancy, it would be 60 odd years. But I think that's still sort of comparable to some of these other places. The life expectancy for the EU and the United States is damn near even. But the EU just has so many more people hanging on to that sweet EU government pension. But I'm going to return to this issue a little bit later. But do pause for a moment and see that the average life expectancy in the United States is brushing up against 80 years old, whereas in Rwanda it's maybe call it about 62. Okay, so that's a pretty meaningful difference in age. Gross domestic products. The figure that you see for Rwanda, depending on your screen resolution, you will get a very, very thin black bar there. In other words, there is a measure there. It's not as though Rwanda just popped out as NA, they didn't measure it. No, it's that small. It is pretty small. India, one of the BRICS, one of the developing countries, easily eclipses Rwanda, and comparison of Rwanda's GDP to the United States, there really isn't any. Now this one's interesting. So China, EU, and United States, we have no statistics, at least from the World Bank. I didn't have enough time to sort of go chasing down another source, but from the World Bank, we don't know about the number of adults living with AIDS. Why should I say AIDS? Technically, it's HIV. HIV, which I have on the title slide, but not on the label there. So we look at this and we think, okay, well, Rwanda has quite a number, but India has a lot more. But let's look at that as a percentage of the total population, and those two bars get reversed. So, all right, more than 1.5% of the population is living with HIV. That seems like a pretty small number, but even a country like India, which is a developing economy that has a rather large population of people living with HIV, the percentages relative to the total population is quite small. And that is one of the things that brought statisticians to Rwanda. When we talk about Rwanda, one of the first things that we think about is something that happened about 20 years ago that I'm not going to dwell on too much tonight, but 20 years ago, there was a horrific event in Rwanda. There was a civil war, but more significantly, there was one of the worst acts of genocide that humans have ever seen. This was an episode where in the midst of a kind of civil conflict, there were ethnic boundaries, ethnic rivalries that led to the elimination of 1 million people through murder. Right, 1 million people in Rwanda were killed in the genocide. Let's hop back to the total population figure just so we can get an idea of that. And Rwanda in 2010 was about 10 million. I can say that it was comparable to that in 1994 when the genocide took place. So that is 1 million people. Let's call it about 10% of the population wiped out. In addition, there were several other million who fled the country as refugees. The infrastructure of the country was absolutely decimated. Rwanda is not a big place, not a lot of people, and when you tally it up, due to either a death or emigration, roughly half the populace is gone. All of the roads have been destroyed. All of the crops have been dug up or burned. This is a city that, a country that has lost everything that a society needs in order to rebuild itself. And so now the life expectancy and the prevalence of communicable disease starts to make quite a bit of sense. In 1994, it's not as though Rwanda was a flourishing, well-developed modern society, and when a society of that means sort of collapses in on itself, things can get pretty bleak. So that's sort of the narrative and some of the numbers. This is a picture of Kigali, Rwanda in 1968. So this is sort of what it looked like a long time ago on the ground, okay? And this is not a big place. This is, you can kind of see from a distance what it looks like today. I'm going to walk up here and kind of point. So this is central Kigali. I took this picture. The one from 1968 I didn't take because I wasn't alive then. But this one I did take, and we're going to look at a few more. It is a modern city with several, you can see, sort of modern tall buildings. And it is very difficult to believe. In 2014, it was 20 years to the day that the genocide took place. It is very, very difficult to believe that both this city 1968, and the site of such incredible ethnic devastation were the same place, right? So here we're going to get a couple of other views. That looks better on my screen than on yours. So let's flip over to this one. Okay, I know that we're sort of washing out the colors. But this is a very, very large, densely populated place. And they are very interested in being a participant in a modern society. We saw the statistics about HIV. I could pull up similar statistics about malaria, about yellow fever, about any number of communicable diseases. No, I think I laid out $200-300 in inoculations that my insurance company wouldn't cover in order to be able to go over there. So I got hepatitis A, not B, because that was I think going to be actually $200, and I told my wife, like, I'm just going to roll the dice on that one with the other hepatitis B, and so she was fine. Hepatitis B actually is generally something you're only going to get if you have sort of sexual contact, and I said, it's okay, honey, I'm good. Not going to be over there for having fun. So this is what they're all about, and this is you'll see ads like this at a lot of bus platforms, and I think that you wouldn't necessarily see something comparable here, right? You might see celebrities with good intentions, maybe not profound scientific knowledge, suggesting that parents not get their kids vaccinated. That may be something that's a little more in the public sphere in the US, but we don't really see things like this. So they're very conscious of the problem and how they're trying to address it. And then we're going to see these guys. You can kind of barely make it out right here. That's the RBC, the Rwandan Biomedical Center. And this is the organization that we were working with. They firmly believe, and I think they have every right to, that within the next few years they're going to completely rid the populace of malaria. Central Africa will continue to struggle with this, particularly nations like Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which borders Rwanda to the west, which is a state that lacks a lot of these basic institutions to deal with the problem. But in Rwanda, they're going to sort it out.
What programmers are they using? Nets, and what else are they using?
Specifically, I couldn't really say. The sort of on-the-ground contact that I got was largely to do with research, and they're looking at a number of things. So, diagnostic techniques that are particularly effective. There's a big emphasis on survey methods, because what's happening is they're going to villages, surveying people to try to get a sense of where there is a great risk. So it's at that level. In terms of prevention, I really couldn't say. I mean, it may be something as basic as inoculation. I didn't get malaria because I had drugs to prevent that. Post-genocide, there was, at that moment, quite a bit too late, a great deal of interest and financial support for Rwanda, and that is my guess as to where a lot of that is going to come from. But specifically, I really couldn't say. Okay. So here we are. That's me, and yeah, see if you can spot who the instructors are at the course. So on the right, in the middle, that's Jean, and in the front, Mary was one of the other instructors. Okay, so this is the group. To Mary's right is the head of the RBC, and it was an interesting mix of people. Some of them had statistical backgrounds, many of them did not. Most of them were physicians or clinical researchers. And when I say clinical researchers, I don't mean perhaps in the way that we think, but you're sort of lab technicians, right? So getting them to understand statistics, getting them to work with R, getting us to understand each other speaking in English was a great challenge. It was only a few years ago, so call it maybe like 3-4 years ago, that Rwanda began a preference for English as sort of the preferred non-native language. The native language would be Kinyarwanda, which most people there speak. Prior to 3 or 4 years ago, if there was going to be a second language as sort of an international language, that would have been French because of historical colonial influence. But as one of the steps to become sort of a participant on the modern stage, a decision was made to switch over to English. I can tell you from my experience, English tends to be the preferred commercial language. I spent a bit of time in Germany, and we would do business all manner of places, and particularly in Asia and so forth. Everybody speaks English. The French might not be too happy about it, but everybody speaks English. So here you can see us. And it was a very, very interesting experience, very, very tough for me. I'm not a professional educator. And to sort of lecture to a non-statistical audience who was getting their first experience in R and grappling with some pretty tough stuff was really, really draining. I can tell you it was one of the more difficult things that I've done. I arrived after about 24 hours of travel on a sort of Saturday late afternoon. Slept in on Sunday. Jean-Marie and I spent sort of 3-4 hours going over plan for instruction for the week on Sunday. And it was just 5 days of you get up, you work, and by the end of it, you have a bite to eat, and I was exhausted. Okay. Also interesting in that our plan for how the week was going to go wasn't really at all how it actually went. We were kind of having to modify what it is that we were instructing at the end of every day. But this is kind of what it looks like, and this is just about it. There were a couple of very interesting experiences. I'll share one. There were a lot of moments of just people sitting down at a computer, working through stuff, working through R in the same way that I do at my desk many days, trying to debug stuff, work through what statistical technique or the other to apply in a particular context. So I was sitting down with one man, and we're working through the thing, and it was something fairly basic. He wanted to know whether or not particular measurement techniques were the same. And at that point I said, well, if you've got this measurement as a response and this other measurement as a predictor, and you do a linear regression, and you have a slope of 0 and a slope of 1 and an intercept of 0, then they're just about like you could do a nova or whatever. But that's sort of what I told him, because he was just grasping linear regression, so I sort of approached it from that angle. So like good 10-15 minutes we're doing this at one point, because you need to do this when you're looking at data. So what is it that we're looking at? Tell me about the data that we're looking at. Well, these are 3 different diagnostic techniques to determine whether or not someone is carrying HIV. Oh, okay. So this is a little bit different than the insurance information that I tend to look at every day. But there's just that sort of one moment of reminding us why we're there. But then we're like back at it, plowing through data, munging all of the information that he gets. Okay. So this is sort of what it looks like when when we take an interest. We're acting at a very, very, very micro level. But I do want to talk about something else. This is what it looks like when we don't pay attention. This is what it looks like when we don't have an interest, really, in the problems of a very, very small, insignificant Central African country. This is the Rwanda Genocide Memorial, and I can tell you it was one of the more difficult, moving experiences that I've ever had. On this site, there is a museum talking about the incidents of 1994. More significantly, more profoundly, and more movingly, there are mass graves with the bodies of an estimated 250,000 victims of the genocide. This is one of them. You can see that there's this cinder block covering, and it goes back. There's a second behind that one, and there's a third behind the other. There are about 4 rows of these with the remains of I don't know how many people underneath. You can see that people still come, family members or friends or others, still placing flowers on the graves. This is one site. There are others. Killing was particularly horrific in Kigali, which was the population center. There are others. In the end, we're not going to know how many people are specifically who. Very, very difficult experience. There's bits of it that I'm not going to talk about in a forum like this, just because it's just not appropriate, and frankly, it's just hard. So this was sort of the Sunday before I left. Had completed the course of instruction, and difficult being alone. Miss my wife, miss my kids. For me, one of the big reasons to go there is Africa. 20 years ago, that episode was seen as something that was insignificant. Famously, Bob Dole was on Face the Nation or Meet the Press or something like this, talking about the developing situation in Rwanda. But we knew that this happened, just so that we're clear, that there's not a reason to wonder what was going on. And Bob Dole said that, there's no national interest there, so I don't think that we're going to intervene. And just so that we're going to be bipartisan here, the Clinton administration does not come off looking terribly well at that time either. But this is Africa. This is, I wish that I had created this visual, but this is all of the world's landmass that could fit in Africa. If we want to lighten it up a little bit, we could talk about the Mercator projection and what that does to our perception of the world. Africa is one of those places that looks about as large as Greenland if you use a particular projection. But this is what happens if you take that, the world's landmass and stuff it into Africa. What you can do is you can fit probably about 90% of the world's economy in that space. If we do a GDP measure, so landmass, Africa would be comparable to about 90% of the world. But I think in GDP, the picture is going to look quite a bit different. You look at me, I don't look particularly African, I don't think. But we all are, right? So I don't have any direct ties with that place. But tens of thousands of years ago, yes, we all did. This is where humanity came from. This is the source of a great many things. And often it seems that it is only the source of human misery or terrorism or cheap material goods, the cheapest of which historically has been free human labor, practice that for the most part is gone. But what I can say is it is capable of being so much more. Being there in Kigali, talking to people, all of whom are convinced that this place has every right to sit alongside any other modern developed nation. It's impossible to reconcile that picture with what we typically see. So I'm just going to leave you with that, and we're going to move from a very, very large view of this place and what I've done there to very, very quickly emphasize that what I've done is minor, trivial, absolutely immeasurable in the grand scheme of Africa's march towards a different kind of society and its perception of a different kind of society. That Sunday, as I was walking through the Genocide Memorial, as I say, exhausted. Spent a week trying to assist the Rwanda Biomedical Center as best I can, and then confronted with this, with the horrors of what had taken place. I was lonely, I was miserable. Sent a text to my wife saying, what have I done here? I mean, I've just spent a shocking amount of money to get over here. Went through a lot of hassle. Have abandoned my family, and I don't know really what it all amounts to. And one of the reasons why we get married is because she says this. Now, I don't know what a Russian Jew who grew up in Chicago is doing, walking around with an ability to rapidly quote Mother Teresa, but it was spot on, and that means okay. So not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. I hope that's what I did. It was a small thing. It was a very, very small thing, but I did it as best I could. And as promised, that's it.